So happy Memorial Day weekend, everyone. I hope that you'll get some opportunity this weekend, maybe you already have, to spend some time with friends and family and relax a little bit and celebrate that summer is finally upon us. And we want to take time, of course, to remember those who have sacrificed their lives on our behalf and just be so grateful for that. And so happy Memorial Day weekend to you. I hope it is a great weekend for you. For those of you that are guests with us today, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge you. We are so thankful you're here with us. And I have to tell you that if you're a guest here with us today on Memorial Weekend, that is like really impressive. Because on a weekend like this, a lot of church attenders don't even attend church. And so if you are a guest with us, showing up here for the very first time, that is incredibly impressive. We are glad you're here, and we would love the opportunity to get to know you more, you and maybe your family that is with you or your friends, and we would love to find ways to serve you and connect with you and just take care of you and your family. And so you'll hear more about that later on in our time together as well, but we're so thankful you're here. And I also want to tell you, if you're a guest, that today is going to feel quite a bit different for a bit than it usually would on a weekend. It's usually like at this time in our gathering that one of our pastors would come out, usually me, and preach and teach a message from the Bible. We believe in the Bible. We build everything we do on the Bible. But today is not going to be that. Today is going to feel a little bit more like kind of a family gathering, kind of like we're gathered around the kitchen table just having a talk. But we're glad you pulled up a seat. You are welcome to listen in, and it'll be informative for you as well. So again, welcome to you if you're a guest. Well, by now, most of you have heard the news one way or another that my wife, Alex, and I have made the decision that after 11 years, we're going to be transitioning away from Lakeside to begin another new ministry opportunity in the next month or so. Earlier in the week, I sent out a video announcement sharing this news, and I chose video intentionally, by the way, and I want to say that because I know video doesn't feel ideal for some people for this kind of news or announcement, but I chose video intentionally because I wanted all of you to be able to hear it from me the way I wanted to communicate it and not have to hear it through the grapevine and maybe get this story not exactly how it actually was. Not that you would do that, but that can kind of happen. So I sent the video out so you would hear from me, but also, honestly, so there'd be an opportunity for just some of the emotions to settle a little bit before we gathered in this place together, mostly for my sake. And I know that, a decision like this one, an announcement like this one, it brings about a lot of emotion and a lot of questions like why and when and how and what's next. And so what I'm really wanting to do just in these next few minutes together is I want to do my very best to just try to answer some of those questions, just kind of give you a peek into my heart and my life of how we arrived at this decision, and then really pivot our eyes towards what is next. Because we need to do that. Like our mission as a church is way too important to shift into neutral or stay on pause. And so we want to answer some questions, but then we've got to keep moving forward together, even in the time I have left with you. And so I announced that we made the decision to partner with an organization called Orchard Group Church Planting. And they are an organization that specializes in planting churches. And we're going to partner with them to plant a brand new church in the city of West Palm Beach, Florida. Now, I know for a lot of you, even if you've been around church for a while, the phrase church planting might be rather unfamiliar to you. You're like, planting a church. Like I've planted a garden, but I've never planted a church. How does that go? Planting a church, what it means is starting a brand new church, and that's just kind of the language we use. And Lakeside Christian Church actually has a very rich and broad history in planting churches, not just around the United States of America, but in many places also around the world over the last few decades. But just over the last few years, we've actually helped plant several different churches right here in the United States. We have helped and are still helping right now plant a church in San Luis Obispo, California, a place of incredible need. We have helped out with an amazing church plant that is right off the strip in Las Vegas. And very recently, we've been investing in and partnering with a new church plant in Over the Rhine right here in our own city that we love. Now, some of you know this about Lakeside, that not only have we planted many churches over the years in a lot of different places, but over 50 years ago, Lakeside Christian Church was planted itself in this community. There was this small group of men and women that they felt stirred up by God to seize the new opportunities in this growing area of North Kentucky that we know so well now, and they wanted to plant a church. And so they planted a church that became known as Lakeside Christian Church. And it wasn't long after they had stepped out in faith and trust to plant Lakeside Christian Church, they hired this very young, wet behind the ears, whippersnapper preacher named John Russell. And John Russell ended up serving this community and this congregation for more than 40 years. And what I was thinking this week is imagine this. Imagine if that group of people would have ignored the nudging of God to plant this church, and they just didn't plant it. And I don't want to be overly dramatic, but if this church would not have been planted all those years ago, likely there'd be thousands of people who know Jesus who would not know Jesus. During the ministry of this church over the last 50-some years, I mean, hundreds of marriages have been healed, and addictions have been broken, and victories have been won, and families have been fed, and children have been adopted and taken care of, and baptisms have been performed. This church has and continues to have incredible influence in this community and has made immeasurable impact on this community. And just imagine if that group of men and women would have ignored the stirring of God to plant this particular church. Church planting is proven to be likely the most effective way to reach new people for Jesus. And really it makes sense why. Something new is going on and people notice it. They kind of slow down in life a little bit. Their eyebrows raised, their curiosity is piqued, and like, hey, what's going on over there? What are those people doing? Why are they building that building? Why are they meeting there? And then people decide maybe to explore their faith for the first time, and maybe the very first time in a long time. And so I'm so proud of our church, Lakeside, that we do have this rich history of planting churches. But not only do we have a long history of planting churches, we actually have a very long and broad history, of sending people to plant churches. Many years ago, a guy named Jerry Halpin was sent from this church to plant a church in the Long Island area of New York, and it's been a really, really effective church. It's reached a lot of people. Several years ago, we sent one of our own worship pastors. Actually, he was from our Hebron campus, Jordan Gallagher, and he joined a team that was planting the church out in San Luis Obispo, California. We call it Slow City Church, and he joined that team. And just about a month ago, we announced that one of our children's pastors, Abby Armbruster, is also moving out to join the work that's going on with Slow City, because things are really thriving and growing, and they need someone who can go out there, invest in the kids, and help that church continue to grow. And now, of course, I and my family, we are going to plant as well. We're being sent by you, and I'm so thankful for that. I can honestly tell you that if a year ago, one of you would have pulled me aside and said, hey, Jamie, you know what you're going to do in about a year? You're going to leave everything behind, and you're going to go plant a church. What I would have promptly said back to you is, you have spent way too much time in quarantine because you are crazy. That's just what I would have said, because I've never given any real thought to church planting. I love church planting. I believe in it. I admire church planters. I'm like, man, they're so courageous. Way to go. You go do that, and I'll stay here. And I've prayed for church planters and financially supported church planters, and I've sat on a management team for a church plant even down in Orlando, but I've never given any really serious consideration at all to the idea of me being involved in actually planting of a church. And so, of course, it raises this question like, okay, so how did all this and why is all this happening? Well, let me explain it this way, that in every profession, there are what I would just say are occupational hazards, right? You know that, like whatever job you do, whatever work you do, even if you're a stay-at-home parent, there are some occupational hazards. So if you're an accountant, maybe you're gonna get carpal tunnel from spending so much time crunching the numbers. And if you're an international pilot, you're gonna spend a lot of time away from home because you're like going on really, really long trips. And if you're a middle school teacher, then you're probably gonna have to fight to maintain your sanity. And God bless you, by the way, if you're a middle school teacher. There's occupational hazards for every single profession, including the life of being a pastor. And there are several of them for pastors, but one of the occupational hazards of being a pastor is you need to practice what you preach. And several months ago, back in February, I believe, we taught through a series of messages called Eyes Wide Open. And the entire series was about prayer. And we looked at it, and we really believed that it was a real pivot point in the history of this church in regards to our commitment to and our dependence upon prayer. We said we don't want to be a church that just believes in prayer. We want to be a church that is built on prayer. And so 4 weeks, it was all things prayer. Talked about prayer, and it set some new rhythms for our church. And we kind of talked about different ways to pray. We talked about raw prayer, like really letting God hear your emotion, and persistent prayer that don't let it be one and done, that keep praying, keep leaning into God. But Then we preached this week on bold prayer. And during that week, as we preached on a bold prayer, or I preached on bold prayer, I asked some questions and I made some probing statements that I think really cut into some of us to really examine our own prayer life and then examine really our understanding of who God is. I made this statement, I believe it to be true, that the size of prayers we pray reflect the size of God we believe in. And by that, what I meant is that many of us, we settle over time to kind of pray safe and careful and really, really small and predictable prayers. And it's like we need to grow beyond that because we have a really, really big God. Those small prayers don't reflect who God is and what he's capable of doing. And I know a lot of people that week were really, really convicted by the teaching, and no one was more convicted by the teaching than me. Because that week I was doing some reflecting, and I realized that I just sat in front of hundreds, if not thousands of people in person and online and taught about, bold prayer. You got to pray these big prayers that not just change your world, but maybe they change the world. And then I realized, Jamie, you haven't been doing that. You're good at talking about bold prayer, and you can articulate it probably pretty effectively and get people charged up that they need to pray bold prayers. But Jamie, you haven't really been doing that much. That I've been praying, but I've been praying some pretty small, safe, predictable prayers. It was like, well, I got this small God, and he could probably handle prayers like these. And I remember telling my wife, too, that babe, we need to really step up the ante in regards to our prayer lives. We need to be praying some bigger and bold prayers and not having any idea what that was going to mean for us. And oftentimes, when you pray bold prayers, here's what happened. God will unleash his presence and power in your life right where you are doing what you're already doing. And you'll just notice his presence and you'll notice his power. But other times when you pray bold prayers, what's going to happen is that God is going to say, okay, you ready? You really ready? I'm going to abruptly interrupt your life, sometimes subtly, sometimes very significantly. And so the bold prayers we were praying led us to some discussions, conversation about church planting. And I still remember vividly the very first discussion my wife and I really have ever had seriously about the idea of planting a church. And so it was a Saturday morning, and I'd been downstairs outside sitting in our hot tub. It was a cold morning, so I was sitting in the hot tub, and I came upstairs into the kitchen. I was just only wearing a wet swimsuit and a towel around my neck, and looking back, that's like a really awkward way to have a serious conversation, especially if you've ever seen my bird chest. Most of you haven't. You should be really thankful for that. But all I had on was a wet swimsuit and a towel around my neck, and I kind of like plopped up on the counter of our kitchen and I said, hey babe, so I need to tell you this crazy idea, okay? We've been having these, conversations about bold prayer. And I believe, babe, that we need to at least pray about the idea of planting a church. Now, to be really, really honest with you, I hoped when I said the idea that she would immediately dismiss it, be like, you must have been in the hot tub too long. Like, I think it's gone to your brain. Things are not well. Go to your room and get some outfit on, get some clothes on, come down and we can have a real conversation. I hope she would do that. In fact, before I even shared the idea with her, I said, hey, I know you're not going to like this idea, and it's like really crazy, and you're going to think I'm really weird, and it's just not us. It's not for us. And that's what I said, hoping that she would dismiss it all so we could just kind of move on with a really comfortable, predictable life. And instead, my wife said, she's very connected to the Spirit of God. She said, I'm in. Let's start the prayers. And so right then we did. And again, I'll honestly admit to you, I'm not proud of it, but I was kind of sheepishly praying the big, bold prayers, kind of like, hey, God, maybe, hoping again God would sort of dismiss it and like, yeah, church planting is a great thing, but it's not for you. And I say all that because, church planting can sound like really fun and really adventurous. It probably involves some fun and adventure, but it's really, really hard work. Like most church plants, they never make it to sustainability and they end up maybe closing their doors or it just doesn't work out. And many church planters, they swiftly fall on their face because the challenge is much too big. And church planting, it is just risky business. And continuing on in my comfortable North Kentucky life, not North Carolina, I don't know where that came from, but comfortable North Kentucky life just sounded more appealing at the time. However, we continued to pray and the Lord began to move. And within a few days, I was like, you know what? I'm just going to at least reach out to the CEO of Orchard Group, and his name is Brent Storms. He's a friend of mine. And this was a Friday. I reached out to him and said, hey, crazy idea on my mind. Just want to at least talk to you about it for a moment. That was a Friday, and he just texted back. He said, hey, I'm going to be in Cincinnati on Monday. He lives in California. I'm going to be in Cincinnati on Monday. Do you want to have lunch? I was like, oh, snap. Okay, I guess. And so we had lunch together, and he said, hey, what's going on? And we said, well, we're just kind of stirred up, and we're kind of exploring what God may be doing in our lives. We're not really sure, and we were thinking about church planting, but not too much. And he said, well, if you were to plant a church, let's just think theoretically, where would you? Where's a place you really love and care about? And I said, well, we love Florida. That's where we used to live before we moved to North Kentucky. And he said, I'm glad you said Florida. It's the place of probably greatest need in the United States of America, along with California. So I'm glad you said Florida. And he said, where in Florida? I said, I don't know. Again, I'm not planning a church, dude. Back off, okay? And, we were like Southwest Florida used to be our home, so it's really, really comfortable to us, but we don't know. And then he said, well, let me just say, would you consider West Palm Beach? And I know to some people it'd be like, well, that'd be an easy yes, right? But no, it wasn't an easy yes. I was like, I don't know if we'd really consider that or not, Brent. I've been to Florida like 1,000,001 times, but I've never been to West Palm Beach, and we're familiar with the west side of the state, but I've spent very little time on the east side of the state, and I just don't know anything about it. I'm not sure, but it's like, okay, we'll look into it a little bit. And so we looked into it, and I found that West Palm Beach, yeah, it's a beautiful place, but it's a broken place. And in some ways, it's a glamorous place, but in many ways, it is a godless place. Yeah, in some ways, it's sort of like flowing with milk and honey, but it is spiritually dry. It's malnourished. There's an organization called the Barna Group that does a lot of research about faith and spirituality in churches. And some of the research they do is really in regards to kind of like spiritual growth and development. Where are pockets of the country where it's going really, really well, where the gospel's really spreading, and where are areas of the country where just there's not a whole lot of vitality going on, there's not a lot of spiritual development going on. And one of the phrases they use is never churched to refer to like groups of people. And that refers to people that have been never churched, meaning that faith and church has played zero role in their lives. And so they put out this list a couple years ago, never church communities, like places that desperately need the gospel. Number 2 on the list was San Luis Obispo, which is a place we're helping to plant the church, Slow City, so I'm really glad that's going on. But number 1 on the list was West Palm Beach, Florida. There's some list you don't want to finish number 1 on. And when I read that and I realized the implications of the spiritual vacuum that's really going on in that place, that the gospel has not spread, that people are not becoming introduced to Jesus for whatever reason, it really, really began to stir me. And so I decided, okay, I'm gonna look into this specific opportunity just a tiny bit more, because it was a very unique opportunity. I knew. I'd been told that there was this tiny little congregation in West Palm Beach there called Community Christian of West Palm. And for many years, they've really, really been struggling. They've been declining in size, declining in impact. I believe they sort of lost vision perhaps a long time ago, running out of money to really operate the ministry. What they've had, though, is a resource of location. They sit on 12 acres of land in 2 buildings. The 12 acres, though, sits on this 6-lane thoroughfare that runs north and south right through the 1 million people or so that live in West Palm, and hundreds of thousands of people pass their land every single day. But they've just been floundering. And now then their pastor, they're going to be losing him because he's retiring at the end of May. Today is his last Sunday of his 16-year ministry, and they have had no idea what's coming next. We're like, I don't know what the future looks like, or if we have a future. And so I, stirred up by the Holy Spirit, set up a conversation with them. It took me a long time. I had to, send a note by a pigeon. It seems like to finally get a hold of them, but got a hold of them and said, hey, I'm this guy up here in North Kentucky, and leading a church up here and kind of exploring this idea. And I know you're not sure about the future. Would you like to sit and talk? And so we sat and talked together about the future and what God may be doing in them and what God may be doing in me. And man, they had all kinds of ideas, from selling the property because it's really valuable to giving it to another church that are locally, a Spanish-speaking congregation, or piping in sermons from another church, or just kind of selling part of the land and continuing on as they've been doing. They just had all of these ideas swirling all over the place. We had a meeting, and I didn't think it went that well. But a few days later, they called and they said, hey, God has spoken clearly to us that if you will come, you and your family come, if you'll leave everything behind and come to plant this church, we will hand over all of our land and all of our property for you to begin a new work. And then God had my heart. And literally just last weekend, their small little faithful congregation, about 20 people, voted almost unanimously to relinquish all the property and all the land, all the buildings, to this new work, to this new church planter. They have no idea who I am. They don't know my name. They don't know anything about me. They've just trusted the Lord that something's going on here. And they voted that, yeah, we think that's the best thing to happen, to close up this property for a year and a new church to plant next August of 2022. And the congregation's decision down there to affirm this movement of God, it was kind of the final indication my wife and I needed to sense that this was absolutely God's leading in our lives. And as you can imagine, this has been a really, really difficult decision for us. And the feelings are very bittersweet. We're excited and very nervous about the future, but we also, we're sad about leaving this place and these people that we've invested in for 11 years. And many of you, you've experienced transition. You know what it's like. I mean, I've talked to several of you this week, and you're like, yeah, I get it. I get what it's like. And you know that if you're going to make this kind of transition, kind of middle of life, and you have kids that are growing up and stuff, I mean, it's hard because to embrace the new, you've really got to grieve what you're letting go of too. And we've been doing that. A few days ago, we told our kids, they didn't know anything until like Monday of this last week. We gathered them up and we told them, and yeah, there was a lot of screaming and a lot of laughter and a lot of excitement. There's a lot of tears. Our beautiful daughter Hazel, I was surprised kind of how in tune to her emotions she is already. And as a little girl, and when all the excitement was kind of waning, her lip came out and the tears began to stream. And she said, I'm not sure how to feel, Dad, because I want to go, but I also want to stay. And I said, baby, you just described how Daddy feels. So we're going to be here another month or so. And so I don't want this moment right here to be this, big farewell talk, but I do want to say some things to you because I know we don't have a whole lot of time left together. But I've been so honored to serve as your pastor. Sorry, it's tough. You've been so gracious and kind. You've been so generous and hospitable to us from the first day. As some of you know, 11 years ago, the night before we moved here, literally, our 18-month-old niece, Kaden, tragically passed away in her sleep. And so our very first week here in North Kentucky, getting used to our new home was crushing grief. And that very first week, I was officiating a funeral for our little baby niece. And that same day, our moving truck showed up and in the house we were renting. And a group of you, faithful, loving people, you gathered up at our house. And not only did you unload the truck, but you set up our entire house, including our cribs for our babies. And that's big love. And that's what we've experienced our entire time here. We've laughed together, and we've celebrated together, and we've cried together. You've walked with us as we welcomed our two youngest kids into the world, Hazel and Harlow. And you held me up. As I grieved the loss of my dad, and then last year my stepsister. You've always allowed me time and space to dote on my wife and kids that I've always considered my first congregation. And you've leaned in so closely to listen to me teach week after week, and you've laughed even when the jokes weren't funny, and I know they're usually not. And you've followed me into some wild and crazy ideas like expanding into 2 brand new communities, building additional campuses. And you've said, okay, let's go. And I'm thankful you did. The elders have always treated me better than I deserved. And I've never felt anything less than complete support from them. My family has been so blessed to grow up with you, and there's so many of you who've shown me and shown them what it looks like to love Jesus, love like Jesus. and to help others to do the same. On paper, this transition makes absolutely no sense. And yet that's often how God works. My future is filled with so many I don't knows. But one thing I do know for sure is that the future of this church is bright. That God is not done working in this place. In fact, I believe he's only just begun working in and through this place. And when I leave in a few weeks, you are being left in incredibly good and capable hands. You have a staff that is amazingly talented. And the only thing that exceeds their competence is their character. The elders of our congregation, again, are so humble and they're so caring and they're so kind, and they're going to guide you well as you move forward. And I assure you, you can trust them. You can trust the decisions they make about the future. And they know that you're clamoring to know what's going to happen next. And so this next week, they're not going to let much time go by. This next week, they're going to share an announcement with you about kind of what the future is going to look like and what's going to happen next. And there's a whole lot more I could say, but I've said enough for now. But in the next few weeks, I'm just going to continue to teach and continue to be with you, continue to break bread with you, because I just love being with you, and we want to soak that up in these next few weeks. So we're going to finish up this series we've been in called How Being So Right Can Be So Wrong. And then I'm going to spend my final weeks teaching from Psalm 23. What a beautiful passage it is. However, for now, what I'd love to do is just lead you in a time of prayer. Father, thank you for your goodness. Thank you that you are so faithful. Thank you that we get to share a mission even though we're not going to stay together. Thank you for the kindness of these people and the grace and the generosity. Thank you for the patience they've shared with me as we've succeeded, as we've chased down wild ideas and others haven't gone so well. As I've grown into a man and a dad and had more kids and have had a really full, busy life, and they've given me the space to do that. Thank you that they've been so generous to us, God. And they've allowed me to dote on my little kids so I can try to show them what it looks like to follow Jesus and not just the larger congregation. Thank you that we can trust you. That even when our future just holds a lot of I don't knows, you hold us and say, but I know. So God, we just thank you, and we're going to continue to worship you together. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.